Thanks a lot, folks. Thanks a lot, Jose. I was a late addition to the schedule when somebody else had to back out, and when I was asked to fill in, I thought I would be filling in one of the small tracks, not the big room. So I am not a consultant or a keynote speaker, so I apologize. I'm not a prolific generator of IP. So my hope in this talk, for those of you who are Lean, Kanban, etc. experts, I will be sort of preaching to the choir, as we would say where I come from, and you'll just nod along and smile because it's things you know and like. And hopefully it's somewhat interesting to some of the rest of you folks. So Scrumagilean is a term, actually perhaps introductions for folks who don't know me. I won't read all of that. Basically, the short answer is I'm the COO of Lean Kit. And before that, I've done lots of other odd jobs here, there, and everywhere. Most important for this, that gives me a certain amount of standing to talk about these kinds of subjects, was I was director of project management for a company called HCA, which is a $26 billion hospital company. So I ran the implementation of Scrum, Agile, and Kanban, or at least proto-Kanban, for about a $25 million IT portfolio of about 300 people in the US and India. So Scrumagilean, when I first started talking about Scrum and Agile at my old company HCA, I got a lot of eye rolling from the senior executives that I was talking about, because there were people talking about Agile, there were people talking about Lean, there were people talking about Kanban, there were people talking about Scrum, there were people talking about XP, and it all sounded really similar to those executives, but we had all these different names for it, and it quite frankly sounded somewhat ridiculous to them. And so the Scrumagilean was a term that my boss coined for the mismatch of odd terms that we were coming up to describe the things that we talked about. So I'll skip that one. So we were talking about Scrum and Agile for years and years and years at our company, and really never got any traction with management. They would let us do it, but they would let us do it and roll their eyes. Basically, it was something that it was okay for us to do, it was okay for the kids to do, but it wasn't anything that impacted the grown-ups. And as long as we stayed off in our corner and did that weird Scrumagilean stuff, don't bother me, I don't care, sure. And then we had, several of us went to meet with and see some presentations by Mary Poppendike, and learned about Lean software development, and learned about how, in her view, and now I would say in my view, what we talk about as Agile fits really more broadly as part of Lean as anybody else in any other industry would refer to it. In the world of Agile, Lean is often discussed as one of these subsets of Agile. If you come outside of the world of IT, no offense, that's vaguely ridiculous. The things that we talk about in the world of Agile in any other industry is Lean. All the same concepts. Slightly different language, all the same concepts, it's Lean. You don't have to believe me, you don't have to join in my religion about that, but the reason why it might be useful to you, and the reason why I talk about it, is that it was useful to me in describing these concepts to management and speaking to them in language that made sense to them. And it also allowed me to tap into other bodies of knowledge in other industries that were tremendously useful as we began to scale Agile from small teams up to pretty large organizations. And by now, Lean and Agile have spread pretty successfully through the many thousands of people of HCA's IT organization. And it was because we adopted the language of Lean. You will note here that I also put Kanban in a box kind of in between methodologies, because again, I would suggest to you that Kanban is a technique that applies to work being done in different fields. It is most certainly not an IT methodology. So what I want to spend the bulk of my time talking about with you is sort of what I learned about Lean and a little bit of my experience and the use that I found for that by talking through some Lean principles. So again, I am not a consultant. I take no credit for IP. This is probably a couple of years ago variant of what Mary Poppendike and others talk about when they talk about Lean software development. But again, hopefully I'll be a reasonably good parrot of what they talk about and bring in my experiences. Right. So just kind of going around the wheel here. One of the things that's said when talking about Lean from the outside is somehow Lean is about doing more with less. It's about leaning down an organization, making it smaller or streamlining it, which frankly a lot of that's really Six Sigma. It's not Lean at all. And one of the things that's used to justify that view of what Lean is Lean's focused on eliminating waste. So on the one hand, everybody can agree that eliminating waste, that's a great idea. Who can be for waste, right? Of course we should get rid of waste. It's like mom and apple pie. On the other hand, when people hear eliminate waste, what that sounds is threatening. What it sounds like is redundancies. What it sounds like is cutting back on an organization. And that's really not what it means in a Lean context. In a Lean context, eliminating waste is what it says up at the top of the screen there. Waste is anything that you do that your customer wouldn't pay for. If you took your product or your service and you presented it to your customer as an itemized bill and they wouldn't pay for it, it's waste. So if I make lecterns, my customer would be happy to pay for the wood or the varnish or the craftsman or the tools. The customer does not want to pay for my scrap. They don't want to pay for my accounting system. They don't want to pay for my legal system. They don't want to pay for any of those things that they don't get value for. So when we talk about eliminating waste in a Lean context, we're talking about taking a really hard view of what we do in an organization from a customer's perspective. Now, does that mean that we can always eliminate the waste that we identify? No. Sometimes wastes are necessary in the short term or even necessary, there are requirements in the long term. Government regulations in many cases, from the customer's perspective, would be waste, but we quite simply have no choice but to comply with those. So eliminating waste is a crucially important idea in the world of Lean. In the world of Lean in IT, or in knowledge work, maybe would be a better way of saying it, these are some of these are Lean are common for all of these. But here's some specific wastes that we should bear in mind. The first is work in progress. Customers pay for done. Customers do not pay for doing. Doing everything that is doing, if it does not become done quickly, is waste. It's carrying cost. And I know that that's easy to miss in the world of IT because our work in process is invisible. It's in our heads, it's in documents, it's in code repositories, but nevertheless, it does have a carrying cost and it's waste. Especially, again, if it's delayed. If a customer asks me to make something and I deliver it tomorrow, I am their hero. If I deliver it next week, I'm a pretty cool guy. If I deliver it next month, you guys have got a decent process. If I deliver it next year, I wasted their time. So work in process that goes for a long, long time, the longer it goes, the more likely it is to be waste. And all my effort that went into building it becomes waste. Most of what we do in knowledge work, in the long run, is completely wasteful. You guys have seen the numbers. The Forrester research, the Standish Group research, lots of research shows that, and I'm not talking about Microsoft Office here. I'm talking about custom software development that we're paid to do. Most of those features that are built are rarely or never used. If you then take that and combine that with the fact that most systems that get built, most of the cost of the system is well after the project to build it. It's in maintenance. I just got an email the other day from the company that I used to work for, HCA, a retirement of a system, that they were taking a system offline. I helped to build that system 13 years ago. So I was really focused at the time on the project cost of releasing that project. Vastly more money was spent on maintaining that system for the other 12 and a half years that it lived than during those 6 months. So if we accept the fact, even within a reasonable approximation, that an awful lot of what we build isn't actually used, and yet we keep maintaining it, we keep testing it, we keep monitoring it, we keep et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, what that means is most of what we do is money down the toilet. So what that means is what we should be trying to do is taking a very hard-nosed view of building only what we are quite confident will actually be used and drive customer value, and also being very focused on life cycle cost in what we build rather than project cost, which is easy to say, hard to do, because project teams are now and life cycle costs are later, but food for thought. Anybody ever play the telephone game when they were like at summer camp as kids or anything like that? The sort of thing you get in a line and you whisper in a person's ear of the message, and then they whisper in the next ear, and they whisper in the next ear. 20 people down. It bears no relation to what the first person said. It's hilarious, but it bears no relation to what that first person said. Now think about that in our world. The customer doesn't know what they want. They've never actually done this before. They can't verbalize it effectively. The BA who hears it can't properly document it. The designer who reads it doesn't really know what they're saying. The design or the mock-up that they do doesn't fully capture it. The code that they do doesn't actually get it into practice. The test cases tested what the customer's intent was, not what the developers actually built. Lots and lots of room for error. So every handoff that you have in that process is an opportunity for loss of information and therefore degradation of quality. And that includes handoffs to ourselves, which is what task switching is about. So if I'm not a developer by trade, I was a BA and a project manager. So if I'm working on a spec and I'm in the zone, I'm in it, I've spent lots of time talking with a customer, I really understand this. I really know, I've got it, I'm in their head, and I'm writing and I'm writing and I'm writing, and this is great, it's gold, and this is, you know, like I'm going to get a Pulitzer for this documentation, it's so wonderful. And then I get a called away for something, and I have to work on something else. Well, it takes me a while to get out of that head and into the head of the other thing that's asked from me. Later on, when I go back to work on this original thing, the thing that I thought was a Pulitzer is crap. You know, I don't know who this guy was who was writing this stuff, but I don't understand him, I don't like him, and I certainly don't want to build the system he was talking about, even though it was me just a little while ago. So handoffs and task switching produce tremendous loss of information quality in a process, and therefore generate tremendous amounts of waste. In every other type of production process that is out there, they call what we call QA, QC. It's quality control. It's something that you do at the end of the line in order to test for defects. And they pretty much stopped doing it a long time ago because it doesn't work. QA in other industries spend their time focusing on making sure that the process cannot generate errors in the first place. They spend their time failure-proofing the process, not testing for defects. That's not to say that you don't do any, but that's to say that the true valuable spent time is spent in preventing those things from happening in the first place. which sort of reminds me of an aside. Some of these references that I'm making are to manufacturing. And I have heard, well, we're not doing, this is an industry, this is IT. Manufacturing is routine. This is just standard stuff. That stuff doesn't apply. To be blunt, if you say that, it means you don't know anything about manufacturing. I mean, sure, you're doing like high volume, mass producing gum. That's a very routine process. But when you're making aircraft engines, when you're doing 3D printing, when you're doing job shop manufacturing for custom products that have to be delivered the next day, it is extremely complex stuff. It's code in metal. So the processes that they do are just as applicable as in our world as they are in theirs. Creating knowledge. When we start any project, we don't know what we're talking about. We should just assume that's a given. The only way we get to knowing what we're talking about is by doing ourselves. And really, the only way that we know anything is true is by getting it into the hands of a customer, and not just getting it into the hands of a customer, but seeing that the customer is actually using it, has accepted it, and likes it. So when we go into projects, our assumption should be that the project is an experiment, and our goal is to create knowledge, and then to keep that knowledge by keeping the knowledgeable together, working together, because most of the knowledge that is created is implicit knowledge. I already talked about the failures of documentation and the problems of task switching. We can never adequately document knowledge. We can try. It's not to say it's a waste of time, but it will always be imperfect. It is always much better to rely on knowledge that's built into a finished product and or knowledge that's implicit in the group of people who are experts working in a domain. Some of these things seem, I'm sure, like they're in conflict with one another, these different principles. We're down here, we've got moving fast and so on and so forth. How does that work with deferring commitment? If we're talking about being agile, we need to do something now because we need to create some knowledge. So how is it possible that we would defer commitment? Well, when we're doing our work, we need to be looking very carefully at what decisions are prototypable, can be thrown out later, and which are architectural, fundamental, and unchangeable. And the ones that are unchangeable, we need to defer to the last responsible minute. Just think about it. Think about how quickly technology moves today in every aspect, software, hardware, everything. If we're doing even iterative work, if we're doing an iterative cycle that's going to go out 6 months or a year, does anybody in the room feel like they can confidently predict what all of the hardware vendors that you work with will have out on the shelf in 9 months? I'm not. So the things that you're going to do that depend on those things should be pushed back as far as we possibly can. Let me give you, this is a hard one for people to sometimes to get their heads around. So how do you do that? How do you make that work? I'll give you sort of two examples. One, either of which, one which is sort of shorter, and then one's a little bit more relevant for IT. In the world of manufacturing, there's a concept called set-based design. And what it basically means is if I'm building a new platform, a new car, I have subsystems to that car. Take a door and a door frame, for example. I will not design and build just one door and door frame design. The company will design and build 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 of them simultaneously, and then bring those together at set points in the development process to figure out which ones work better together. What you're doing there is you're allowing yourself to iterate but not have to iterate sequentially, instead iterate in parallel, because the value of having a good finished product quickly vastly outweighs the additional cost of doing simultaneous parallel development. Give you an example in the world of IT. Again, HCA, hospital company. Hospital companies have a system called an electronic medical record system. You might call it the equivalent of an ERP for a hospital system. So HCA uses a system called Meditech. It's a product that they buy. Meditech was first implemented in HCA in the 80s. And subsequent versions had been installed for this. So basically, at the time I was there, everybody who worked for HCA in IT had been using Meditech for their entire career. They knew nothing but Meditech. So the American government is doing a big push for electronic medical records in the course of overhauling the healthcare system, and was putting out simultaneously carrots and sticks about doing this. So basically they said if you do not have effective electronic medical record systems within a certain amount of time, you will start losing money. We will pay you less and less reimbursement for care. But if you do it quickly, we will pay you bonuses, huge bonuses. In the case of HCA, in the tune of $1 billion. A lot of money, a lot of money. All right, so HCA already had Meditech, but to satisfy these requirements, they were going to have to go to the new version of Meditech, which was, in essence, an entirely different platform. So there's $1 billion out there, right? No brainer, just go to it, right? This is what most people do. But remember, this is in essence a generational decision. So the previous platform of Meditech had been in place for 25 years. Likely that whatever you pick next will be in place for 25 years. And if you think about a company with 185,000 people using the system every day, the true cost of this system is in 25 years of life cycle cost. Training and development and all these kinds of things. So at the very least, they were going to do an RFP, they were going to do selection, they were going to do what most companies would do, right? They would do a fair dog and pony show, conference room pilot, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because we had started talking about lean, some of my peers in the clinical side of HCA's IT group were able to convince the CIO to actually simultaneously implement 3 different electronic medical record systems in different hospitals within the company's network, which they have now run for going on 3-4 years. They are now going to down select and roll one of those out to the rest of the network. So if you were looking only at project cost, that was vastly more expensive. And basically it entails throwaway work. It entails ripping an electronic medical record system out of hospitals. But if you look at the other 200 hospitals that they run and the other 500 hospitals that they provide IT services for 25 years, spending actually truly many, many millions of dollars extra in the course of a few years is going to save them billions of dollars over the course of the next several decades. So that's what I mean by deferring commitment and a realistic picture of set-based design in the world of IT. Delivering fast. I think we all know this, right? This is why all the things I've been talking about before are the way that we avoid building features that we don't need, the way that we gain knowledge, the way that we eliminate all these kinds of waste is fast, 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 fast. The quicker that we can go from concept to cash, the better in all cases. We need to think about optimizing our organizations for speed. This has always been true, but Lord knows it's true now. Mostly what a company is a collection of brains. And the companies that succeed are the ones that engage all of the brains in the building, not just the brains of the leadership. And I mean the creative parts of the brain, not the, yes sir, I'll do what you tell me, army game sides of their brains. Whatever we do, again, there's a knock on lean because there's a confusion between lean and Six Sigma, that lean is about hollowing out an organization or making things mechanistic or making things efficient or whatever. Far from it. There's an extreme focus in Lean on respecting people because the simple fact is, in any organization, most of the decisions, most of the real decisions are made by the employees on the floor every day. Executives think that they're making decisions, but if they're not truly engaging their people and aligning their people, they're just shouting out orders into the wind, and the employees are making their own decisions for themselves. So truly effective organizations are built through respecting people so that those people put themselves heart and soul into the mission of that organization. And then optimizing the whole. It is, at the very least, useless, and in the worst case, worse than useless, extraordinarily counterproductive, to focus on efficiency or process improvement at random in every department of an organization. Because the simple fact is, any organization has a bottleneck. There's some step in your process, there's some resource, whether it be physical or people, that is the true controller of how much work that you can get done. Process improvement that you do on that bottleneck yields real results. Process improvement that you do elsewhere might be just wasted, and it might in fact be counterproductive because it's making your bottleneck worse. When you're looking at process improvement, when you're looking at your agile efforts, your lean efforts in your organization, you need to be looking at how your teams work together and how work flows through the entire organization. Or you're killing yourself. All right. Last little bit here, and then I can take some questions. This is a hobby horse of mine, pet peeve. You hear all the time about Scrum versus Kanban, or I'm doing Scrumban, or this makes no sense. There's simply no comparison, and I don't mean qualitatively. Don't get me wrong. Scrum and Kanban are not apples and oranges. They're apples and chickens. They're two totally different types of things. Kanban is a methodology for improving another methodology. So look at this. This is the Kanban method. I know that we've had presentations about particular implementations of Kanban and what people do. But this is the Kanban method. This is what you do. You visualize, you limit work in progress, you then use that to manage flow, you make sure that your process policies are explicit, and then you improve collaboratively. It says nothing about roles. It says nothing about what meetings you should or shouldn't do. It says nothing about whether you should have iterations or you shouldn't have iterations. That's simply not what it's about. It's a technique for improving whatever it is that you already do. All right, Scrum. So here's, Scrum is a process. Scrum is a cycle. Scrum is a fixed series of events, meetings, deliverables, roles. There is in it, even among the most strict Scrumites, no prohibition against visualization. There's no prohibition against whip limitation. As a matter of fact, Scrum is whip limitation. It's just a con whip. It's limiting whip coming into the sprint rather than limiting whip in a step in your process. It is whip limitation. There's no prohibition against measuring flow, anything. They're two different things, and they can exist in perfect harmony, or whatever kumbaya thing that you want to say. They work perfectly well together. And in my experience, I almost never meet, we work with a lot of teams. I almost never meet anybody who's doing real, true, Nokia test, by the book, perfect Scrum. And I'm not sure what perfect by the book Kanban would look like, because it's going to look different in every case. Almost all the Scrum I've ever seen in practice is Scrum Bud. And almost all the Kanban I've ever seen in IT in practice has an awful lot of cadence and activities that's not dissimilar to what Scrum teams do. often less rigid because they've discovered it's unnecessary. So what I would ask you to do walking away is to seriously think about this, is, you know, to say we're switching from Scrum to Kanban. What does that mean? If you're doing Scrum and you're liking it, but you want to get extra benefit, which, I mean, do you think you'd get some benefit from doing better visualization? Getting a little bit better about limiting your work in process for individuals, doing better measurement, et cetera, et cetera? This is just common sense. So please, if you're in the world of Agile, if you're in the world of Scrum right now, and you're looking at quote unquote doing Kanban, don't think about it that way. Think about doing what you're doing and improving it. And if you're in the world of Kanban, I would ask you, don't bash those nice people doing Scrum, because they're nice people. And let's help them find a better way. And just finally, for those who are less familiar with the broad sort of lean canon, I'll leave you with a few reading recommendations. The Goal, if you have not read it, go buy a copy of the book and read it now. One of the best business books ever. This was an industry-changing book, and it still is. Fantastic, fantastic book. Mary and Tom Poppendike's Implementing Lean Software Development, fantastic book. They've written 3 books. That's the middle of the 2 books. I would recommend it to people as if you're going to read just one, it's the one that's going to give you the most. And the last one here, the Phoenix Project, this is a new book. It's only been out for about 3 months, I think. And what they were setting out to do is be the goal for IT. And I've read it, and I think that they did it pretty darn successfully. So what I mean by this is both books are business novels. Both books start out with a story of a person in a company, and the company is in trouble. And it is the story of their discovery of how to fix things within their organization. And I think you will enjoy these books, and where I would really recommend them to you, what they will really help you with is, your results may vary, but my experience is senior executives do not read textbooks. Senior executives do not read method manuals. Senior executives do not read how-tos, because they are not going to how-to. They have us to do the how-to. They read stories. They read things, again, in my experience, and I have some reasonable experience with some pretty senior executives. In my experience, senior executives, even the most data-driven, actually make their decisions by instinct and then look at the data later to prove that why they believe what they actually believe. Read Malcolm Gladwell, by the way, for some insight into why that's the case. So books like The Goal, books like The Phoenix Project, which tell a story and reach them emotionally and convince them emotionally by putting them in the shoes of somebody who's like them, will go way further towards convincing them than any analytical, logical, bullet point, process-driven argument than you could ever give them. Now, they may turn around to you and say, go find the textbooks that help us do this thing, and maybe later on they'll read it. But high praise for all of these books, and if you're interested in taking what you're doing in an agile context at a team level and truly scaling it up to an organizational level, I would submit to you that Lean and these books as good examples of how to think about it are invaluable. And with that, I am open to questions, or you guys can just go get a coffee break either way. Yes?
A couple of questions, really.
Sure.
You said that work in progress was a type of waste.
Yes.
Where do you stand on estimation?
I believe that estimation can be necessary, but it should be done in as light a way as possible. At the team level, if we're talking about stories for the next sprint, my view is with enough data points of history, estimation becomes primarily a matter of taking new items and matching them to the patterns of the other data that you already have. What I would say on the other hand, though, is as you scale things up within an organization, it becomes more necessary to do true estimating. Again, it's all very well to sort of iterate our way through stories, but if we're doing a major project and the CFO needs to know how to manage the cash flow and how to do bonds out on the market in order to fund the project, he kind of needs an estimate. If the CMO wants to know when to run the advertising campaign, they kind of need an estimate. You get the point. So we need to do that but we need to do it in as light a weight as possible. And I would suggest to you, keep your eyes open for there was some interesting stuff at LSSC in Boston last year, and there's going to be some presentations in Chicago at LKD13 that are about using some more advanced statistical forecasting techniques to replace brute force Gantt chart long-range estimating. Long answer to a short question.
My second question was about physical boards versus virtual boards. Where do you stand?
Well, virtual boards are awesome. If you have a small team, and by small I mean 5, 10, 20 people and they're co-located, use a physical board. I mean, I'm happy to take your money if you want to buy an electronic system to do your metrics, but you don't need our system for that. What I would suggest to you, though, is when you're scaling things up to multiple teams and who are not in the same place. And when I say the same place, people when they hear not in the same place, they hear like part of the team's in England and part of the team's in Bangalore. I would submit to you, though, you can get just as bad a communication between people who are on the 3rd and 4th floors of a building or 2 different buildings on a corporate campus. So any kind of large-scale distributed kind of implementation of Agile, I would suggest to you that tools become more necessary. Now, I think one of the very hopeful trends that's going on right now is the rapidly declining price and improving quality of visual display technology. So, you know, we're a pretty small company and a startup. We have giant screen TVs all over our walls. They're pretty cheap these days. We've got pre-ordered, I'll put in a plug for a company. I have no shares or any financial interest in this company. It's a company called Leap Motion. And basically what they're doing is they've created a product that, call it Connect, that actually works. There's one part of it that plugs into your computer, and there's another part that you put in front of a screen, and it projects an IR field up in front of the screen and allows you to basically, Minority Report, there you go. Minority Report is here, and pretty soon the ads as we walk around the airport will be just for us too. So I would say that electronic tools are very important for scaling. In the past, there's been some sacrifice of fidelity as it related to the physical board. I think that there's things coming together that reduce that significantly. There was another, yeah?
What you were saying about estimation as waste might be a really popular meme, especially in the local circuit at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
What I would counter that with is that waste can be valuable.
And don't waste your waste.
Yeah, look at the lumber industry. Sawdust is waste to them, and yet they've built a business out of chipboard and hamster bedding. Just because we think of it as waste, don't assume that it has no value and it can't be reused elsewhere within the organisation. And estimation sometimes falls into this category.
Sure. Just make it as lightweight as you possibly can and view it as an experiment, not a commitment. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the time.